We are live. Oh my God. Hi, Alex. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hey Grace, so glad to be here.
I'm so excited about this one because I've been such a longtime fan. I'm so glad that we got to meet up in New York. And you're such a legend in the industry, in the media slash tag slash like VC industry.
Oh, well, thank you. I think I've just survived a long time.
Okay, so let's talk about like the archaeology major thing. So like I heard so like from I was binging through your podcast and basically I think you were saying that like journalism is kind of similar to like archaeology as like you are finding the little gems that are like people maybe like ignoring. Um why don't we start with like, how do you grow up and then obviously you grew up in like New York Upper West Side? So you're like a New Yorker your whole life. Why don't we talk about like the core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into who you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the through line of all of it is curiosity. That's where I'm grateful that I got to grow up in New York City and travel a lot as a kid, read a lot because it just made me fascinated with eras, cultures, leaders, well known, lesser known, and I always just loved kind of digging into things, trying to wrap my head around big questions, or especially dig into things that I thought were underappreciated are represented, whether that was a phase in history or a person. And so that's part of what drew me to archaeology and history as a student. And I thought maybe I should be Indiana Jones growing up. And then I realized that Indiana Jones in 2025 would probably be in jail because a
Mhm.
lot of what he did would not be very appreciated or legal today.
Mhm.
But what I liked about archaeology was just that idea of like going deep on something, finding something new, and being able to share it with the world. And so that's how the pivot to journalism was really natural for me because as a storyteller about startups, I'm sharing those kind of unearthed or underappreciated stories with a wider audience and getting people to care. Maybe take going out on a limb on something that isn't consensus yet. And so that's how it kind of all fits together and has been a lot of fun for me.
For sure. Okay, so I have so many questions there. So first of all, like, so you like maybe we start with like I made like a quick mental list about like what to talk about, which is number one, I'm always curious about like what makes a great story, and then for you to like do like I can see some sort of like similarity in like our careers. Like I worked in like real estate before, so like real estate investing before. Like we'll find like basically disappreciated like asset and then to repackage them and then sell to other, like I guess like sell to a better price. But I feel like to find the underappreciated space similar to the startup space, it's like there's always like some major problem. Like how do you market these like unsexy startups, or like people don't really find them for a reason, right? So like how do you kind of like make an unsexy story interesting?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that whether it's in history or it's now with businesses, um, by default, we all care more about ourselves and our own story than anyone else does. And that can actually be liberating in a way because I feel like, I'm very guilty of this. We all worry about what people think about us, what the market or our peers are saying about us. And I feel like the reality is most of the time they're just not, they're
They
focused
just
on
don't think about you.
themselves and their own problems. And so if you accept that,
100%.
I think it really helps start to think about what is a good story because what that means is we have to be fighting for everyone else's attention in a way that they want to hear our story. And I think that's the biggest thing I start with founders of startups is you know no one just by default wants to hear you endlessly talk about what you're doing, unless maybe they're your good friend or your relative, and even then maybe they're just being polite. So what is it about what you're doing that matters to other people? Why should they be rooting for you? What could they learn from you? Like we're all trying to relate it back to us in some way. And so I think what makes a really good story is one that has that sort of either tactical or strategic lesson that allows everyone else to go about their day a little bit better. Maybe they feel smarter about something, they can talk about something better, or they can apply it to their own life.
For sure. I wonder, okay, so maybe we could talk about like how do you write a good article? So like what goes into your research? So like basically I think you share about like the Peloton story or like the Canva story. I feel like a lot of these like stories before they become like a Forbes story or like Fortune story, like they were not really validated by the general public. Like um now you're on your own. So like I wonder like do you do any like testing? So like some people would test on like Twitter to test like a tagline if like this thing will become a viral tweet and then I write an article about it. But I guess like how do you kind of like do the research? Number one is like testing like if the media product slash the newsletter would be a huge success, or how do you kind of like go deep? Like, so how long does it take you to write an article that's like diving deep into something? Because you have to get like quotes and stuff like that. But like, how many people do you have to like chat with to complete the whole perspective?
It really depends. Back at Forbes, it could be a really long process. It could be months to get a story from the idea
Mhm,
to the cover story, print on
mhm,
newsstands at the airport. And for some of those, I would talk to 50 or 60 people. That is the
wow.
luxury of working at a big media company, is that I would basically have the air cover of my team to go really deep for weeks on a subject. I would travel, like for my UiPath story, I went to Bucharest in Romania. For the Canvas story you mentioned, I obviously went to Sydney to meet with Melanie Perkins there, which was really cool. And I would go around meeting with people. I would also try to meet with customers. So when I wrote the first big story about Blue Apron, the meal kit company, a decade ago, I went to farms in Central California with one of the co-founders to actually talk to farmers. So that was pretty cool. And you're really just trying to get that context, because you don't want to write about something you feel like you don't know anything about. One of the biggest challenges as a journalist, and I still feel this with upstarts, is that I'm talking to different people every day who know more about one thing than I do. I might know a little bit about a million things, but they know a lot about the thing that they're doing more than I do. And so I have to be trying to just learn as much as I can, have as open a mind as possible, but get as much context from everywhere else that I can obtain it, to at least have a credible conversation and understand if people are, maybe like a little biased, or like saying, oh, we're all the best at this one thing, and five people say that, and you're like, how do I know, who to trust here? That you have to get context from that. That was true back in the archaeology and history too. Is like, if you just find a pot in the desert and you don't know how deep it was in the ground, you don't know anything about the material fabric, you have no idea how old this pot is, right? We need to get context of like, what was it made with, where was it found, all of that stuff, to actually understand why the pot matters. It might just be a random pot. And so similarly, when I'm talking to a startup, it's kind of understanding what could be the potential here. Why should this have a big impact? What does it matter to the reader? And that was what made a really good cover story, was like big numbers involved, big impact. Like Melanie and Canva have obviously worked with millions of people. It's become a huge company. Hopefully a great IPO, in the near future. And so to be able to plant our flag and do the first cover story on Canva, that was really great. But it was honestly a challenge, like to get Forbes to feel conviction to put her on the cover. You don't know. You never know. You can just be as informed as possible, but then you kind of have to take a bit of a calculated or educated risk.
Totally. Okay, so how do you plan, like, who do you interview and then who do you kind of like go after? Uh, and how deep? Like, since like I feel like for let's say for a story to go like 60 people, like how do you kind of like structure your time and then like manage the output about that amount of people to because
Well,
I feel
the shortest answer is that I can't do that right now. The
like
reality is, running a business, Upstarts is a bootstrap startup, and I'm doing all our biz dev, event planning, a lot of different things, and it's going great. But I wear a bunch of different hats, and so it would take a lot more scale and sort of structure in place for me to be able to go super deep like that on a story again. I hope to go deeper on big stories, and I think anyone in the audience should expect some fun profiles coming up. But the reality is, it's a constant juggling act for me now. The average story I'm writing for Upstarts is still putting in a ton of work, but we're probably talking more like 6, maybe 10 interviews. And those you just have to be really efficient to like schedule the right calls, get the right questions to them as fast as possible, and then extract the important information. So I'm pretty efficient at that, but it does take a lot of time. And where those stories are coming from are a mix of my own ideas. Like the first big story I wrote for Upstarts was about an app called Granola, a note-taking app that I love. I just got recommended that to try it out as a user, and I was so impressed with the product that I cold emailed the CEO and was like, hey, I'd like to write about you. And so it all went from there. So that one was like totally just my own random email. But then sometimes, people will text me, like VCs or founder peers will say, hey, my friend or this person I'm advising has news, they'd like to talk to you. Sometimes I already have a relationship with the people. I did a cover story for Forbes on Flexport a couple of years ago. And I had met Ryan Peterson, the CEO, almost a decade before when they were a tiny company. And I just waited a long time until it felt like it was the right time to write about it. So sometimes it's kind of been cooking for a long time. And then sometimes, honestly, I love founder initiatives. So the story I wrote on Tuesday was about an early stage startup called Roadway, which is trying to automate growth marketing using AI. The founder and CEO used to work at Notion and Webflow. And he honestly just cold contacted me. He found my info. He was like, hey, I know this is totally random, but you've been writing a lot about AI and go-to-market, and I think that our tool could kind of fit the theme you've been covering. Would you check it out? And I honestly thought it was really interesting, so I wrote about it. So like, I have to just be very flexible in where the story ideas are coming from.
So how do you decide like if you cover them or not? Or let's say if there's like 5 different things that are building in AI customer service or AI like SDR, I feel like those would be like some of the most like popular like ideas ever in the startup line right now. So like how do you pick like the winner to a degree?
So a couple of thoughts. Great question. I think first is I can't pick the winner, and I think the one thing that saves me is that if we're right that a category is exploding, there should be a few interesting startups, at least for a while, that matter. And so I give myself maybe a little bit of grace there, pun intended, where I don't have to be like, this is the only company that matters. It just has to be one that I think has a real shot at mattering, as an early stage startup, similar to how a VC would evaluate. But then on the other side, it comes from who are their customers, who are their advisors, what is the track record of the founder. I evaluate them a lot like, anyone would to buy a product or invest in the product. And so that's how like in the outbound sales side, I wrote about Unify, which has had some momentum. I can't say that Unify will be the only big winner in that space, but I think that, they clearly have momentum. I've also written a lot about Clay on the growth side. And then, in customer service, I actually didn't feel like, okay, there's a clear winner here. But what I did is I wrote about the competition. So I was like, hey, everyone's talking about Decagon versus Sierra. They both have momentum. And then there's all these other companies that people don't talk about, like Forethought, Assembled, like Intercom. It's obviously a huge category. And so I zoomed out and I looked more at the competition there, which I think is honestly maybe more helpful to the reader in that moment, because it would be crazy to say, oh, Decagon's definitely going to win or Sierra's definitely going to win. Nobody knows that.
For sure. I have a quick question. Wait, is there something on your like speaker? I feel like I hear sounds.
You hear
like maybe,
you're hearing sound?
I feel like maybe it's like if your like sleeve is on like the speaker. Oh no, I hear like sounds from the like my end. I don't know if the audience hear it, but
hopefully nobody, if anyone comments.
Yeah, I think like this is like a huge sound. So like maybe it's something that's covering the speaker on your laptop.
You hear it better now?
Yeah, this is 10 out of 10. This is like amazing. The sound quality is so much better.
So I think StreamYard reconnected my microphone to my iPhone at some point. So my first time using the tool. So it wasn't using my correct microphone. All right. Well, hopefully people were able to hear a little bit.
This is so good. Like the sound is so good right now. Okay, sorry. I just want to make sure like, our listeners can like, hear exactly what you're
Oh
telling.
my God.
You're
Well, anyone who couldn't hear me for the last 10 minutes has given up. So hopefully
no.
people could hear a little bit. Yeah.
I love it right now. Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay. So okay, let's talk about like I feel like maybe we could talk about like what are like I guess like since you have been at Forbes for like 12 years, let's separate like every 4 years as like one big kind of like career leap. Like what were the core lessons that you've learned there? Let's say like the
Um,
three different stages from like the beginner to like
when it
now,
comes to like
obviously.
storytelling or what, I could take that
Like,
in so many different directions, Grace.
or just like anything. I feel like maybe life lessons or like since you have chatted with like literally all the most like successful entrepreneurs in the world, like what are some like core lessons that you've kind of learned that you feel like it's kind of behind the scene, but like something that has kind of like impactful for you?
Okay. I think from talking to founders, the most valuable thing that I kind of learned was that um, kind of to what we were talking about earlier, where people aren't going to care as much as you do. I think that
Mhm,
the superpower of a founder is that they are the soul of their business.
mhm,
They have to really care about that and want to share that with people constantly. I think it's a tiring and lonely
mhm,
job sometimes, but you really are the soul of the company. And knowing how to diffuse that around the organization as you scale is what makes a really great founder CEO. We've seen some
mhm,
founders leave companies in recent years and then come back and
mhm,
kind of like get the company moving again. And I think it's because of that soul. I think there are
mhm,
amazing non-founder CEOs out there who are kind of more the hired gun. Like I've written about Frank Slootman, who took
mhm,
Snowflake public, but they're rare. I think more
mhm,
often that founder, it's like they just know intrinsically, does
mhm,
this feel right for my business? Is this the vision of the business? And I think
mhm,
that cannot be underestimated. So that'd be sort of the first one I think of. I think another
mhm,
one would be that I just find in general that people who act ethically and have their values be transparent, that could be that they don't have to all agree. Like some people have different values with each other, but people who are pretty honest about that, I think in the general win out. I think that folks who try to take shortcuts or sort of like
mhm,
act unethically in the market, like maybe they make money in the short term, but it always catches up to them eventually. And
mhm,
we've seen that in very different ways. But generally speaking, like the no assholes policy, I think is underrated still.
mhm, mhm,
When money can be made in AI or crypto or something, sometimes, especially young people, kind of forget
mhm,
that. And so I would say, like,
mhm.
don't forget that.
I I almost think like but like think about like some of the most successful founders. I don't think money is like what they're after. So sometimes like they're hella rich, right? Like parents are like lawyers or something. But like I guess like how do you think about the founder mentality? What are some like psyches that kind of like drives them to like be ultra successful? Because I think from I guess like the founder of like Canva or like Zoom, I think those are like the different category of founders. Then I started my little I don't know, like marketing AI tool today. So like I feel like a lot of people have reached different levels of success. Do you feel like it's kind of luck or do you feel like it's primarily because of they are actually different than like the regular founders?
I think that I think like overall running a startup and being a founder is so difficult that if you don't
Mhm,
really feel the need for what you're building to exist in the
mhm,
world and
mhm,
basically just be obsessed with that, it's going to be really hard to
mhm,
motivate yourself to do all the things you have to do. And so I think you're right that I don't think money is necessarily the biggest motivator for even a lot of these billionaires who I've spoken to,
mhm,
but having a big impact by spreading their product or their company around the world is a big motivator. The money
mhm,
kind of comes secondarily from that.
mhm,
And I'd say even with controversial leaders like an Elon Musk, I'd say at his best, he's trying to have a big impact on the world, like help the world in the way
mhm,
that he thinks is best, whether it's electric vehicles or energy or going to space. And then at the worst, it's when people start to think about their own fame or their influence, their
mhm,
public persona, and sort of think of themselves more as a brand versus that original business or idea that they're trying to spread through the world. I think that's where Melanie at
mhm,
Canva is a real admirable person. Almost all her net worth is in the Canva Foundation.
but she
Mhm.
still is ruthlessly focused on building Canva out and growing it because she cares about as many people in the world as possible using design tools and being able to use Canva. And the bigger Canva gets, the more impact she can have through her wealth, through all the good it can do. So like she's not going to ever have that $500 million yacht, but she still is like as motivated as the person who wants that yacht, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder. So, like, okay, so when I was like younger, I read like the Donna Karen biography. So basically, her business, from my biggest takeaway, is like I think she's a 10 out of 10 business owner versus like maybe she's like a great designer, but like I'm sure there's like more other great designer out there. So like where I'm getting is like, so do you feel like the product leadership matters more or like business leadership matters more in the billionaire categories?
That's a good question. I think that a lot of the best CEOs are product focused in some way, but sales focused CEOs or highly technical CEOs have had success. I think it really
Mhm.
depends on the kind of business. I think that if you have a founding team who are balanced and you're like, I am just one of the best
Mhm.
salespeople in the world, and then my co-founder is an amazing product person, that can help too. Like with Canva, for example, there are three founders. One is
Mhm.
more business focused, one is more strategy focused, one is more product focused. I think you want that balance. But if we look at Airbnb, we look at Apple's early success, we look at a lot of these companies, like a product focused CEO has been really valuable. But like Satya, would we call him product focused? He's obviously been massively successful at Microsoft. So I think we don't want to be like overly constrained in this, but I do think that um, generally speaking, I often find with successful high growth startups that the founder in some way is very close to the product. That could just be spending all their time talking to customers. Like if you talk to
Mhm.
Wiz or you talk to Flexport or you talk to companies like that, the CEOs are meeting with customers constantly and that keeps them
Mhm.
very close to the product.
Mm. I wonder, okay, so let's talk about the list. So like I feel like you kind of like invented slash like you helped co-created like some of the most iconic lists from the 30 under 30 to like the Cloud 100 to the Midas list. What goes into like creating a successful list? Besides like, obviously Forbes, the brand is very like big, but I guess like how do you think about what goes into it? Like, so let's say if you want to create like Forbes University, like how do you kind of find these people? And then obviously I'm pretty sure at some point, like, like early on in my career, I may got email from you or someone to like, hey, is there like any cracked people in this industry? But like how do you guys like filter out these, 200 submissions for one category of people?
Yeah, so I've worked on a bunch of lists in my career, and I think
Mhm.
there's definitely a spectrum of qualitative to quantitative lists. The first
Mhm.
list I ever worked on was the 40 under 40 at Fortune when I was a college
Mhm.
intern. That list was really hard to be quantitative because you were having 40 people from all different categories
Mhm.
making this list. Serena Williams alongside Sam Altman is like a tough comp. But at the
Mhm.
same time, then there are lists that are like all data driven, like
Mhm.
the Midas list is all data driven. And so I think knowing the objective of the list is the first thing that's important. Like, what
Mhm.
is this list celebrating? And then what is the most fair way to compare people?
Mhm.
I find that most lists are imperfect, but they at least aspire to be as
Mhm.
fair and interesting as possible. With the Midas list, which I ran for 10 years at Forbes, we basically were trying to balance realized and unrealized returns for specific VCs. That was the goal. And then we had a bunch of math that we did
Mhm.
to try to make that as fair as possible. The math could never be perfect, and we
Mhm.
never had 100% of the data out there, but directionally, we would get better every year. And we had like more
Mhm.
and more data that we could run the model in different ways to see like, does this feel better? Does this feel better? So there was a bit of art and science to it. Something like
Mhm.
30 under 30, where I did the VC list for a long time, we would have industry judges. So every year there would be
Mhm.
4 judges who were leaders in the field. We'd keep them secret until the list came out so they wouldn't get just harassed like crazy.
Mhm.
And we'd be trying to give them as much info on each candidate as possible so that they could make some sort of rating. But at the end of the day, it would be their gut reaction to imagine almost like baseball cards for each person. Like, here's all the good things about them in different
Mhm.
ways. But it was qualitative, right? Like, how could you compare a someone who created a really important nonprofit in a category to someone who launched a business there? Is it more
Mhm.
important to have raised 20 million as a emerging manager, or to have done a really big deal at, a big firm that went public? Like, it obviously is not always apples to apples. And that's where sometimes these lists struggle to be like perfectly fair. But at their
Mhm.
best, I think lists create community, they create excitement, they showcase people who wouldn't get as much recognition. I always find it more fun when lists are like showing me people that I've never seen before or I didn't really
Mhm.
know as well. If it's just like the same people over and over, that's not really that exciting.
For sure. I wonder, so like for example, when people nominate people like or I guess like when the judges like what are the criteria that you would filter? So for example, let's say if you're doing marketing AI list, what would be the five benchmark that you would look at? Is that like the revenue? But like who will actually know the revenue? Would the founder, like, if the founder gave you something that like it's probably not the actual revenue, how much of the fact check do you have to like actually check, or do you get the VCs like to like voluntarily share the data, or like how do you even, I guess, like what would be question number one is like what would be the five category that in today's age judging AI company that like you would use to like evaluate them basically. Let's keep it like one question
Well,
at a time.
nobody has the answer. I mean,
Mhm.
there are so many different AI lists right now. I just saw
Yeah.
an exciting one that Mayfield Fund
Mhm.
launched. I know other VC firms are trying to do AI lists.
Mhm.
So the fact that there are so many tells us that we don't have a consensus on the best KPIs. But that
Mhm.
said, I think that what everyone's looking for is customer momentum, revenue and headcount growth,
Mhm.
how much funding they've raised, or like what their implied valuation would be. The same as kind of you would see with, I think, non-AI startups, where I think AI just changes things, is that the revenue growth can be so much faster. It's
Mhm.
harder because we don't know how sticky that growth is.
Mhm.
And as you know, the revenue can get wonky with like pass-throughs and all of that. Like,
Mhm.
is 40% of this revenue going back to Anthropic or OpenAI?
Mhm.
Definitely is a new ball game in that regard. But I think what you'll see with these AI lists is, at the end of the day, people are just looking for momentum, and they're trying to
Mhm.
quantify momentum however they can.
But I feel like for HatCon, it's like not necessarily like the biggest like driver these days, just because of like AI could replace a bunch of things. Like some of the, billion-dollar startup only have less than 50 people these days. How do you think about like so like there's customer, there's like
That's a
revenue.
really good point. I mean, the whole like one person to $1 billion trope.
Mhm.
Ha- Having a lean startup is definitely cool right now, and I think
Mhm.
to run efficiently is admirable. I do think that often we see startups that are getting a lot of revenue growth and customer
Mhm.
growth going through a hiring phase, whether it's for forward deployed engineers to work with customers, or it's in product.
Mhm.
So I'd say, like, generally speaking, more high growth startups need to hire people than not.
Mhm.
But I think, to your point, it's not, I don't think it's so much the like overall headcount that matters as like the direction of, are you in hiring mode? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Mhm.
So
For sure. I wonder, so like let's say for the list, but like what if like the people who are applying to the list are like not necessarily like the most like exciting people, or let's say for example people who are, I think every list have like the top three is, Anthropic or OpenAI or something, or Lovable or something. So how do you think about, I guess, like number one, like engaging with these like top companies to ask them to apply, or like even they apply, let's say, do they really show up at like the Fortune 20 dinner or something?
well, is the goal to have them come to your dinner? I'm sure for some media companies that's
Mhm.
probably true, but for the audience, I'm
Mhm.
not sure that should be the biggest criteria, right? So I would hope
Mhm.
that media companies aren't just thinking about who will show up for their event. The Oscar should go to the best actor, not just the best actor who is willing to go accept the award.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that one way we could do this is, I respect or applaud anyone who's doing lists that don't have the same person on twice. it is
Mhm.
harder because then you will always get people saying, how come you didn't have Grace on there? And you would say, oh, well, Grace was on 2 years ago, so Grace can't make it anymore. And so that's really annoying because you always get people who like haven't looked at every past list and are like, how could you not include so and so? But at
Mhm.
least that way you would always get fresh faces. I think it is a challenge, something like the Forbes AI 50 or other lists out there, because they, I think, want to always have the best of the best. You're right that companies like OpenAI will always be really high on these lists. And so
Mhm.
it becomes more interesting who's number 30 than who's number 5, because number 5 doesn't really change. So
Mm, for sure. I wonder, so like in terms of like pooling the data, like how do you really ask people to like voluntarily give the revenue data? Or like is that just like a ballpark? Like, we saw they landed, they have like 50 customer logo on their website. Let's just go with, I don't know, X number per customer. Or how do you kind of like actually acquire the data, I guess? Like, do the company actually give you their Excel sheet to just like ask you to like evaluate? This is like something I'm always curious about. Like let's like the Kylie Jenner salary situation. It's like, do you ask them to like provide their own like financial or like tax return or
well,
something? Or like
at Forbes, they would sometimes be that specific.
Mhm,
If they had reason to doubt the situation, they might
mhm,
ask to see certified info. Like
mhm,
when I wrote about a VC becoming a billionaire years ago, I
mhm,
got like a notarized note from their wealth manager who like attested to their net worth holding.
mhm,
Um, and people can always lie. They can, like I
mhm,
think one challenge is that venture and the startup ecosystem are, like media, kind of built on trust. If someone is
mhm,
willing to break all the social norms and just lie to everybody
mhm,
constantly and commit fraud, they can get away with it for a while. It'll eventually catch up to them. But you could go out and pitch VCs and make up numbers, and some people would not catch it, at least at first, and maybe they'd eventually catch it, right?
mhm,
And I think similarly, if you want to lie to make a list, like that's a calculated risk that I would say you should not do, but it's very hard to fully stop. I think with Midas, for example, we would have firms submit data, and then we'd
mhm,
also have all the past data, and then
mhm,
we'd also have third party data that vets it. And so
mhm,
if someone just made up a crazy outlier situation and it didn't jive with all the previous years, that would be something that would be flagged.
mhm,
Or if there was a new firm that came out of nowhere and said, we've raised $5 billion and we invested all this money in all these companies, you can vet that kind of pretty easily. But there would of course be situations that are really hard to like fully verify. And so I think,
mhm,
every list at some point uh, is facing a sort of cost benefit analysis of how deep do you want to go. At some point, if someone wants to lie, you just have to catch it later,
mhm.
But it's like,
What
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, I mean, like, let's say, for example, you put together like people nominate so and so that's like their portfolio company or something. Do you ask for the intro to this to directly talk to the startup to be like, hey, what is your revenue? Like, give us your like ballpark on I guess like the growth or something, or like how do you actually collect these things? For I think for the Bessemer like 100 Cloud 100, you guys had some sort of there's like also like I think for like the Midas list, there's like a third party software, right? Like so they kind of like
Midas had a
copy.
secure website. You're totally
Mhm,
right. And you could just update it, secure database. And then Cloud 100, partnering with Bessemer and Salesforce,
mhm,
Forbes would have ranges.
mhm,
So startup might not want to say we have 44 million in ARR, but they
mhm.
might be more likely to check a box saying, we have 40 to 50 or something like that. And
Got
so
it.
we could get directional momentum from
Mhm,
that. But whatever the company, whether it's Forbes or another media company, if Upstart does lists in the future, we have to find a balance of how much data are people willing to share, even if it's
mhm,
private. And if they're not willing to share any, we probably shouldn't do the list. Like
mhm,
I think it's better to have a list with teeth to it and real data. And if that data is impossible to have, not do it at all. Can I give you an example?
go for it.
So I got a ton of requests over the
Mhm,
years, and even since I left Forbes, people have asked me about why isn't there a list of the top angel investors?
Mhm.
I think that is just impossible to get a real data set on,
Mhm.
because some of the best angel investors in the world are public company CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos.
Mhm.
They have no incentive to share their angel
Mhm.
investment track record. And sometimes this
Mhm.
is done through a lot of different entities, pass
Mhm.
throughs, like not even like, I don't even know if their own managers, money managers would know all their angel investments. And so that is one where like you would be missing a lot of people. And then some of the people who would share their angel investments with you would be the ones who are the thirstiest to get recognition. And so you might have this thing where like the people at the top of the list were actually like the second or third tier best angel
Mhm.
investors.
Mhm.
And so I just think, it's not worth, maybe someone will do this. And if anyone's watching and wants to give it a try, God bless, I'm happy to give you free advice on it. But I just think like that's one where structurally the data set will never have enough integrity for it to be worth the trouble.
Mm. I wonder, so like in terms of like monetization, so obviously I feel like media is like kind of like live on sponsorship to a degree. So like how do you think about what is like the most monetizable product in the media world today? So obviously like, we're not talking like Mr. Beast type of media. Like we're talking about like attack driven or like I guess like a business-ish media.
Like where is there the most opportunity, or
I guess, like, what would be, like, the most like, monetizable product in, like, a traditional media? Because like, I'm sure, like, all these, like, big forums or, like, all these big media brands have, like, their annual summit, like, the Fortune something will coming in, like, September. So, like, every year there's, like, 400 dinners, like, 500 lists, and then, like so, like, I guess, like, which
are you
one
asking
would
why there are so many dinners? I agree. There are a lot of dinners. It's not good for our diets.
yeah.
All that free
I
food and wine. Um, there's a couple answers. I'd say for big media,
Mhm,
highest margin is events. Events are where a lot of media companies make their money today. That's no secret. You look at any big media company
mhm,
across the spectrum, they do some
mhm,
sort of big flagship conference and event. They
mhm,
can charge tickets, they can create news out of it, they can have big sponsors. That is where a lot of the money is.
mhm,
What then the fight is about is the next biggest bucket online advertising or subscriptions. The
mhm.
New York Times and some big companies have done a good job of generating paid subscriptions. With upstarts, paid subscriptions are an important part of what I'm doing. But I've already diversified my revenue stream where we have a lead sponsor of the newsletter, and I have a fully in-depth article for free every week. So every
Mhm,
Tuesday, there's a in-depth article like the one I mentioned on Roadway.
mhm,
And so I have like a monthly presenting sponsor. So
mhm,
my sponsor for August is Vanta, a company
mhm,
the audience might know. And before that, I had Notion and
mhm,
Brex. And so they have nothing to do with the editorial, but they help me
mhm,
kind of share that for free. But then it's very important that people get value from my paid articles as well and
mhm,
pay to subscribe. And then over time, you'll see upstarts do more events too. I think a smart media company needs to have multiple revenue streams
mhm,
and not be dependent just on events or just on subscriptions. And we've obviously seen that ones that have no subscriptions and are just online advertising are really struggling and freaking out because AI is changing SEO, is
mhm.
changing the online ad game. And so the days of like bragging about how many visitors you had to your website and all the online ads you could sell, those are definitely gone.
I'm curious about like, how do you know like the revenue cycle of a company or like do you feel like the bigger so like for let's say like a Forbes or something, I guess like what would be their sales pipeline kind of look like? Obviously, we don't have to go for a particular person or a particular company. I'm just saying like um is there like a dedicated like sales person typically to just like deal with like, who do we talk to and stuff like that? But like I'm sure like
Media
the
organizations, big media companies have like large sales teams.
Mhm,
They're run a lot like other businesses where
mhm,
you have an events team, you have a sales team,
mhm,
and typically just like in a company, the enterprise sales are really important. And
mhm,
so just as in a startup, you would have someone who's going for the like $1 million accounts.
mhm,
That's the same in media too, where you're going to work with the biggest companies in the world or the highest value, like a Cartier, Samsung or Cartier or companies like
mhm,
that, to do sort of long term multi-level projects with you because that's where the most revenue will come. But then, of course, they're also working on the small scale too. And so I think the tension has always been in media companies. You have your editorial arm, and then you also have your sales arm, and they don't always have the same kind of goals in mind, or at least like they could be at odds sometimes. Everyone's on the same team, so it usually works out. But it's been very interesting to do this at Upstarts because I'm now all of that. So I'm wearing my hat with you of journalist, and then I'm also wearing my hat as our salesperson, our business development lead, our event planner. I am all of the above. So it's kind of crazy, but it's fun.
I wonder, so how do you think about like, I guess like how much do you charge like each company? So obviously I feel like there is in the startup land, there's obviously people are like, oh, as much as possible, but like what is like the sweet spot that like people would be comfortable buying? Obviously not like throwing like specific numbers, but like I feel like how do you kind of like figure out like how much to charge? Like do you charge better than like higher than competitors, or like do you charge lower than competitors, like, and why?
Well, I firmly believe that under promising and over delivering is the way to live. And so with Upstarts, I'm trying to have a win-win where anyone who partners with us on an event or advertising as a sponsor feels really good about it. And so that could often mean that we are competitive on price with a more established brand. I'm only 6 months old. I'm hustling. I'm a bootstrap startup. So I need to really be nimble there. And so price is one place where I can be nimble, but it doesn't mean that I'm just trying to be the cheapest, right? Because we also want to have the credibility of a powerful audience and a great community, and that should be valued, right? Like I don't want to be known as just like the discount brand compared to a bigger media company. And so that said, like it's not like I'm offering like crazy cheap price points. I think you have to just find the number that feels really good for the budgets of the sponsor and also helps you grow the business. There's usually a sweet spot there. The hard part is that there isn't just the full transparency where I show my spreadsheet, you show your spreadsheet, and we find the middle ground. You have to kind of feel it out. But once you find that middle ground, it's really great because like everyone's happy. No one gets in trouble. We all grow together. And most importantly, my audience, I think, is rooting for me to actually build a successful business. So like they're cool with it. Like I'm not going to do anything that my readers think is sketchy or uncomfortable. Like just so you guys know, Grace did not pay me any money to say how great she is. I just do that on my own.
Thanks. Thank you. I wonder, so like what is on your current like, so like how do you manage your own like CRM? So because every other day ish you have to publish an article, and then there is like also um just like the event agenda, or like just like generally, and then also like the sponsorship agenda. Like do you use like Excel sheet to manage that, or like do you build your own like software? And then how do you think about AI? Like do you AI in an article, or like obviously I don't think you do, um but I think it's like
So I don't, but
people
I
are
do
still
use M dashes just because I'm a writer. And this is something
Mhm,
that, my wife is an English major who's now an investor.
mhm,
And there are a lot of, those of us out there who just like writing who are in the tech world. And I think it's been hard for
mhm,
us because we like M dashes, but everyone's like, oh, that's a sign of ChatGPT now. I don't know if you saw this, but the Notion CEO announced like a new development this week,
mhm,
Ivan, with Notion
mhm,
AI, and he wrote it with M dashes. And
mhm.
the CEO of Cluely, this young hustler guy, wrote
Yeah,
back and
yeah,
was
yeah,
like, "Oh, you must have used AI to write this." And he was like, "No, that's just how I write." And I was like, I really sympathized with Ivan there because I also just put a lot of M dashes in. But no, I do not use AI for my writing. AI is most helpful for me in interviews where I use AI note
mhm,
takers. I use AI to transcribe and summarize interviews for me,
mhm,
which I then drill into, but like it's a good starting point. I also use it to organize my sales calls. Like,
mhm,
if I need 3 takeaways from a call, that's really
mhm,
helpful. And then on the research side, I use a mix of OpenAI, Anthropic, and Perplexity to ask research questions. I will say, I think Perplexity has been the most helpful often, but it's still not there yet where I don't fully trust the answers I get. You know, like I might,
Mhm.
and my questions can be really wonky. It can be like, what is the largest funding round ever for a robotics company? And like
Mhm.
how you define robotics, like there's a lot of like little like variables inside that question. And so
Mhm.
if you ask a bunch of AI tools, give me the top 5 robotics fundraisers, you'll probably get a bunch of different answers. So
Mhm.
it's often like a good starting point for me, but it's not like I can just like generate a table in AI and trust
Mhm.
it to be accurate. I wish.
I I have a question on this. So like how do you like use AI to do data? So like I'm gonna show one of your articles. So for example, like to the audience, like obviously I love these things. Like I
Mhm.
I wonder, do you use like any like AI tool to subtract the data? Obviously this is a Crunchbase, but I guess like how often do you like try to use like Perplexity or like Anthropic or something to pull the data to be on a table format? Or like do you manually like just like find these things and like do you have like a way to track where the industry is going kind of thing?
So this is a great one that you mentioned here, like this funding size chart I did because I actually tried to generate it within the AI tools.
Mhm.
I didn't love the output, but I feel like we're very close to that being a viable option. I think the agents would need to be a little more advanced where I could basically
Mhm.
describe in plain text what I want from the chart and
Mhm.
have them fully deliver it. It gave
Mhm.
me like a chart, but not the
Mhm.
chart I
Mhm.
wanted. What I did here was I used a Perplexity and ChatGPT to check if any companies seemed like they were missing, but I used a data set from Crunchbase. I put that into a Google Sheet. I connected the Google Sheet to Data Wrapper, which is a great free tool you can use to generate basic charts. And then I had to mess around in Data Wrapper to get the chart that I actually wanted. It's not perfect. And I
Mhm.
think like a Data Wrapper AI integration would be great.
Mhm.
But I think like that is my not super sophisticated way to do things. And if I can do that, anyone
Mhm.
can do that. And I think
Yeah.
over time, Perplexity, ChatGPT will kind of allow us to do this
Mhm.
themselves. So yeah.
So another question is like for these like different VCs that you're quoting. So like how
Mhm.
long do you schedule for the conversation? And then do you just text people, be like, hey, like Ethan, can you chat with me like today? Like I need like a quote for this. And then do you have the stories in your mind to like ask like certain people to quote? Or like I mean I've been asked like by different reporters to like contribute my opinion. I'm like, can you just like do it anonymously because I don't want to be quote, like even the good or the bad. I just don't want, like I never say anything bad. I typically just peace out. Like if anyone asks me any bad things, I'm gone. But like
You're like,
I
sorry, I'm getting another call. I can't talk to you anymore.
yeah, exactly. But how do you think about like getting a quote from someone and then like I feel like obviously I'm sure like people, if it's a good thing, people want to be quoted, but like the things like a lot of the things are like not really related to you, right? Let's say if people ask you like a quote for, you know, the $100 million AI engineer, like I mean, I wonder like what's people's like drive to, I guess, like contribute certain information, and like how do you kind of like get people to talk about stuff?
Well, if you pause right here, this was a fun one because now that I have my own business with Upstarts, one tactic I have that I didn't have before is I have a WhatsApp group of my founding
Mhm.
Upstarts. So these
Mhm.
are a few dozen, I think a bit more than 60 folks who have contributed at the highest level to just
Mhm.
support Upstarts. And in
Mhm.
exchange, they get to have this open forum where I'm posting thoughts on every article I publish or other things happening. And ideally it's, you know, a community where people can sort of under Chatham House rules chat with each other safely. Chatham House
Mhm.
rules being like you don't get fully quoted by name in the outside
Mhm.
world. That would not be cool. But what I could do like for this story was I could post in there and be like, hey, does anyone have strong opinions about this? And so here
Mhm.
you see Krishna Gupta, who is a VC and a CEO of a business, responded and was like, oh yeah, I have a lot of strong opinions about this. And so
Mhm.
then we had a side conversation. So
Mhm.
that was a place where I could actually get like high quality people to weigh in. But sometimes if I have the story that I'm looking for, I have to go through an exercise of who would be the dream people to talk to me for this. What's
Mhm.
my way to get to them? If I can't get to them, who's the next best people in my network? And so, yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes, especially if it's like a sensitive story, I'm like texting like 60 people and 5 people are
Mhm.
getting back to me, but that's all I need, you know? And so, just like sales, you have to get used to rejection a lot. A
Mhm.
lot of people like you being like, sorry, can't talk to you right now if it's
Oh my
negative.
god.
But the what I argue to people is that I'm never punching down and gossiping for the sake of it. A story needs to have value and impact for the startup ecosystem. And so my pitch is,
Mhm.
hey, even if you're talking about something that isn't super fun or happy, like this matters to the ecosystem. Otherwise, I wouldn't be calling you. And
Mm.
sometimes people agree, sometimes they don't.
So, like, do you write like the article in your head to be like, "Hey, here's like what I'm hunting down." Like, so here's my take on, you know, um, like people are over racing or whatever. Like, that's like my take, and then do you drop like? I feel like if I were doing the article like commercially, I would just put crazy ass headline and then like work on like I would spend literally 2 days on the first 2 sentences and then the rest are like, okay, whatever fillers, but like how
Maybe you should be my manager because I probably could do a better job of that,
no.
honestly. I'm not that kind of person that I just like, like the Mr. Beast,
Mhm,
like YouTubeification. Like YouTube forces people to be so good at like really dramatic headlines and like
mhm,
first few seconds. I honestly like that's just not my vibe. And if people are subscribing, I hope that they trust that every article is going to be interesting. But I
mhm,
think it's a fair, honestly, it's something that I think about every day. Do I need to sell myself better? Because if even my own readers are super busy and they have 10 newsletters in their inbox in the morning,
mhm,
why are they going to read mine first or like not save it for later? So I definitely think like there's a fine line there where I could sell myself more without it being like clickbaity. But what I don't try to do, and what it sounds like you're kind of asking as well, is like let the facts, like let the narrative then find the facts and like kind of reverse engineer
mhm,
it.
mhm,
Of course, some people probably do that in the media. Like there's a million types of people in the media. And if you fall in love with an idea, it could be really hard to let it go. But I think that
mhm,
is the sign of a good journalist and storyteller. And I hope, the audience would agree that, you know, I actually don't write more stories than I do. Like there are more stories that I think about writing or tips that I get that could be
mhm,
juicy that I opt not to write because for whatever reason they don't meet my standards or I don't feel comfortable with them or I don't believe them. And the choice whether to write or not is arguably the most important one you can make. And so if I am writing, I think I have to believe it. I have to think it holds up. If I
mhm,
start like I'm thinking about a story right now where like I was really excited with it to start. I started talking to a lot of people. It's not quite as clear cut as I thought. And now I'm like, oh, I'm not sure. Maybe it's still worth it. But like, I'm not as excited about it as I was because I'm actually listening to the feedback and not just being like, let me
mhm,
cherry pick the things that confirm my priors.
mhm. Do you have like a strategy in place for like batch producing content?
Um, I have a Notion page where I try to plan out my stories for a few weeks, but I could learn from you because I know you book out your show pretty far out. It is kind of all over the place for me. I am not the most naturally organized person. I'm definitely more of a big picture or like I'm a very like either
Vibe guy?
tactical. I'm very tactical and like I'm very, very productive, but I could always direct my energy better. That's where my wife, who's an investor and worked at a startup and is an free advisor to me, that's where she's always hammering me is to like have more consistency, more structure, make my life easier because often it's like 2 a.m. and I'm just like grinding
Oh,
because I
yeah, yeah,
probably could have
same. My
planned better.
husband say
Yeah.
the same thing about me too. It's like I'm over the place all the time.
She's like
Um,
she's like, "Maybe you wouldn't have to be working so late if you had planned your schedule better." And I'm like, "Well, it's too late now."
how do you I guess, like okay, so you're saying, like, basically you would collect all the information and then let it shape you into an article, right? So but,
I
like
have I have a thesis or a hypothesis, and then I'm testing it with people, and I'm fledging it out, and then I'm seeing if it really holds up, and if I feel good about
Mhm,
it, then I'm packaging up the most important things that I heard to tell it to somebody else.
So like if you're doing like 10 interviews for this article, like besides like okay, so let's say you spend like an hour with like the WhatsApp group and be like, hey, waiting for people to like chime in. And then if no one chime in, you DM like 60 people, that's like 2 hours in. And then like when people get back to you, that's probably the end of the night or like the next day or whatever. And then you like you talk to them. Some people may be like, hey, we can't talk until like week 5. Like, do you just like not go for these people? Or like how do you kind of like structurally put it into an article within like, you know, a day or two?
Yeah, so that's part of why I only publish twice a week, is because the math just doesn't math to have one person do original reporting the way that I'm trying to do every single day. It just wouldn't work. So at least if I'm publishing, you know, my next story is coming out on Tuesday. So, and we're talking right now on a Friday. So I'm already working and thinking about it, but I have a couple days, you know, so there's someone I really want to talk to. And they were like, we should be able to connect over the weekend. So that gives me a window. You know, it's very hard if you're like, I can only give you 3 hours, as you said. So in a situation where I'm in a scramble drill, which is kind of how I think about it, you are going with the best available person. So yeah, that the people I spoke to for this article are all amazing people, but there are other amazing people who are not available who I just didn't get to. And so what I'll do is I'll share the article with them and be like, hey, this is what I was asking you about. Hopefully we can talk for the next one. And that's pretty effective. So
Oh, okay. So give FOMO basically. Okay, so
all about the FOMO.
wow.
We're always creating tactical FOMO.
Do you have 2 more minutes or?
Yeah, I have 2 minutes, and then
Okay.
I think it's my wife's turn to do a taping. You know,
Oh my god,
we're a
the
funny household
rotation.
here. I need to get an
God.
office eventually. Yeah.
Oh my god. Wait, so one question I have is like every founder will ask like how do I code DM like a press person? And then how do you think about like who should they DM first? Let's say if they have a startup right now and then they want to DM you, but maybe like, you know, you may not cover them. But like um first of all, like how would you approach press? And then second of all, like how do you write the cold email?
So the best way to approach press, if you're a founder or a startup, you know, in the audience, is to find someone who cares about your area and has like a plausible reason to talk to you, and then actually take the time to like reach out to them directly or through a warm introduction. So a lot of my interviews come from someone who I've already interviewed or spoken to, saying, "Hey, this person who's a mutual would love to chat with you about X. Are you free?" And then they just throw me on a text with them. You know, I find founders often text with each other. I'm very much that oriented. If you're a PR person or like someone else in the industry, I would say like a really tailored email is helpful. If you try to cut corners using AI and like faking a connection, it doesn't work because my pattern recognition is better than yours. I've looked at tens of thousands of pitch emails over the last 12 years or 15 years. So like, it's just not like acting like we're friends when we're not is I'm going to see through it. So just being mindful of both of our times, being to the point and giving me like a clear reason why it's mutually beneficial to chat. That's really good. I also am always trying to have better information. So if you're like, hey, even if this story is not a fit for you now, but maybe I could be a resource on, let's say, GPU credits in the future, then I'm like, okay, great. I have another person I can call about GPU credits. So I find just like having it really be a two-way street and not just like, hi, I'm announcing something in 3 days. Can you please cover it? Like that's not going to feel as good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I will let you. Okay, let's do like a quick 30-second fire round and then peace out. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book is A Gentleman in Moscow, probably by Emmer Tolles. Right now, I have also been listening to the Expanse sci-fi series. I love sci-fi to just keep my brain fresh and thinking about technology. So I usually always have an audiobook in sci-fi. I also really liked Project Hail Mary, which is going to be a movie soon. Yeah.
Love. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
My first editors took a big chance on me at Fortune, Stephanie Maida and Jennifer Reingold, but I've always had mentors who help. Jesse Hempel is another great mentor. I try to pay it forward. Anyone mentor younger people in your field. It feels great.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
You and a bunch of founders.
Oh God, I'm a founder too. So,
Well, then it's all founders.
thank you. Where can we find you outside of work?
You can find my work at upstartsmedia.com. It's free to subscribe. And I'm also at Alex R. Conrad on LinkedIn, X, Threads, wherever. And I respond to all
Threads?
reader feedback. So any article you read, I will respond.
Amazing. Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We'll let your wife use the room now.
Hopefully I won't be in trouble. And thank you so much for the fun chat, Grace.
Thank you so much. Oh my God.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.